Thunder rolled across Copper Creek as the broken rancher stood on the auction platform, clutching his newborn daughter while the crowd prepared to bid on his labor like livestock. Rain threatened overhead. The wooden platform creaked beneath. Ezekiel Thornfield's worn boots. His calloused hands trembled around 3-month-old Lily Rose. The baby's fever had broken that morning, but her tiny body still felt too warm against his chest. He'd wrapped her in the last clean blanket, Sarah's blanket, the one his wife had been stitching when the pain started too early. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the town square. His words cut through the humid air like a blade through. Wheat, 5 years of labor, strong back, knows cattle and horses, baby girl included at no extra charge. Zeke's jaw tightened. 3 years of drought had stripped his land bare. The winter had taken his cattle. Sarah's death had taken his will. Now Cornelius Blackwood would take what remained of his dignity. The banker stood near the platform's edge, his gold watch chain glinting in the gray light. His smile never reached his eyes. Blackwood had circled the Thornfield ranch for months, waiting for this moment. The debt papers rustled in his manicured hands. Townspeople gathered in the square. Some had been Zeke's neighbors once. They'd shared harvests and barn raisings when times were good. Now they studied him with the calculating gaze of buyers examining horseflesh. Their whispers carried on the wind. The bidding started low. $20 for 5 years. 30, 50. Each number was a nail in his coffin. Lily Rose stirred against his chest, her small fist curling around his shirt button. He pressed his lips to her downy head and breathed in her scent. Milk and innocence and hope he couldn't afford. Blackwood raised his hand. $100. The crowd murmured approval. The banker's bid would stand unchallenged. Everyone knew it. Zeke would spend the next 5 years working Blackwood's land while his daughter grew up calling another man father. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Going once. Going twice. A clear voice cut through the tension. $500. The crowd turned as one. A woman stepped forward from the back of the square. She wore a fine blue dress despite the threatening weather. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a simple bonnet. Her belly curved with late pregnancy, but she carried herself with quiet authority. Zeke had never seen her before. Neither had most of the crowd, judging by their stares. She walked through the parted townspeople like Moses through the Red Sea. Her boots clicked against the wooden boards as she approached the platform. Blackwood's face darkened. His mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. $500 was more than he'd expected to pay for revenge. More than any reasonable person would spend on 5 years of labor, no matter how skilled. The woman reached into her coat and produced a leather pouch. Gold coins spilled into her palm, catching the dim light. Real gold. Not paper promises or credit notes. The auctioneer's eyes widened. She counted the coins with practiced efficiency. Her hands were soft enough for fine dresses, but bore the calluses of hard work. The contradiction wasn't lost on Zeke. Neither was the way she avoided looking directly at him or the baby. Blackwood found his voice. He protested the legitimacy of the bid. Demanded to know the woman's name and business. The auctioneer ignored him. Gold spoke louder than complaints. Seraphina Caldwell was all she offered. Widow, recent arrival from Denver. The auctioneer's gavel fell with finality. Sold. Sarah approached the platform steps. Her movements were careful, protective of her unborn child. She gestured for Zeke to follow without meeting his eyes. Her wagon waited at the square's edge, well-appointed and sturdy. Built for mountain travel. Zeke climbed down from the platform. On unsteady legs, his boots hit the ground with a hollow thud. Free fall into servitude. At least Lily Rose would be cared for. At least she'd have a roof and regular meals. More than he could promise her on his own. Sarah held out her hand for the baby. Zeke hesitated. Lily Rose was all he had left of Sarah, all he had left of himself. But the woman's eyes were gentle despite their reserve. She cradled the infant with practiced ease, cooing soft words that Lily Rose seemed to recognize. The crowd began to disperse. Entertainment over. Business concluded. Blackwood lingered, his face twisted with frustrated rage. He'd been outmaneuvered by a stranger. His plans for slow revenge would have to wait. Sierra helped Zeke into the wagon's back. She'd prepared a soft nest of blankets where he could tend to Lily Rose during the journey. The thoughtfulness surprised him. Most owners wouldn't care about a servant's comfort. She took the driver's seat with surprising agility for a pregnant woman. The reins sat easy in her hands. She'd driven mountain roads before. The horses responded to her touch like old friends. They rolled out of Copper Creek as the first raindrops began to fall. Zeke watched his former life disappear behind them. The town that had seen him born and broken. The church where he'd married Sarah, the banker who'd stolen his future. Sierra said nothing during the first hour of travel. She focused on the winding mountain road with intense concentration. Her silence felt heavy with secrets. Deliberate, protective. Lily Rose slept against Zeke's chest, lulled by the wagon's gentle rocking. Her fever had broken completely now. Color returned to her tiny cheeks. Whatever else happened, she would survive. That had to be enough. The road climbed steadily into pine country. The air grew thin and clean, far from the dust and defeat of the valley below. Sierra's homestead sat hidden among the trees, invisible until they were almost upon it. It wasn't what Zeke had expected. The main house was modest but well-built. Too well-built. Heavy timbers and thick walls spoke of serious construction. The kind meant to last, or to withstand trouble. Outbuildings dotted the property, more than any normal ranch required. A large barn, multiple storage sheds, what looked like a smokehouse, and something else. Underground storage, judging by the heavy wooden doors set into the hillside. Sierra helped him down from the wagon. Her touch was gentle but brief. Professional distance maintained. She led him to a small cabin behind the main house. Clean and furnished, more comfortable than he'd dared hope. She left them there with promises of food and supplies. Her footsteps faded across the yard. Zeke sat on the cabin's single bed, holding Lily Rose in the growing darkness. Through the window, he watched lights move between the outbuildings. Sierra worked late into the night, checking locks, moving supplies, preparing for something. Her movements were efficient, purposeful. Not the actions of a grieving widow managing this simple ranch. Questions multiplied in the darkness. Why had she paid so much for his labor? Why did her homestead feel more like a fortress? Why did a pregnant woman live alone in the mountains with enough supplies to feed an army? And why did her eyes hold the same haunted look he saw in his own mirror each morning? The look of someone carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear. Lily Rose's fever returned with the dawn. Her small body burned against Zeke's chest while he paced the cabin's narrow length. The baby's breathing came quick and shallow. Her tiny fists clenched and unclenched in distress. Zeke knocked on the main house door as morning light filtered through pine branches. No answer. He circled the building, calling Sarah's name into the mountain silence. The wind carried his voice away. He found her in the largest outbuilding, moving crates with careful precision. Her pregnant belly made the work awkward, but she persisted with grim determination. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air. The fever, it's back. Sierra's hands stilled on the wooden crate. She followed him to the cabin without questions. Her touch on Lily Rose's forehead was gentle but clinical, experienced. The baby whimpered at the contact. There are supplies, but they're hidden. She led him to one of the underground storage areas. Heavy wooden doors opened onto stone steps descending into darkness. The space below was larger than the cabin. Shelves lined the walls, packed with goods that made no sense for a widow's ranch. Medical supplies filled one entire section. Bandages and medicines. Surgical tools wrapped in clean cloth. Enough to stock a frontier hospital. Sierra moved through the inventory with practiced familiarity. She selected bottles and powders, measuring doses with precision. Her movements held the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Many times. The questions multiplied in Zeke's mind, but Lily Rose's labored breathing took precedence. They climbed back into daylight. Sierra mixed the medicine in a small bowl, testing temperature with her wrist. She showed Zeke how to administer the dose drop by drop. Her fingers brushed his as she demonstrated, warm and steady. The medicine worked quickly. Color returned to Lily Rose's cheeks. Her breathing eased. She slept peacefully for the first time since the fever's return. Zeke watched each rise and fall of her tiny chest. Sierra prepared to leave. Her hand rested on the doorframe, and she looked back at the sleeping baby. Something soft crossed her features. A memory of loss, perhaps, or longing. A rider approached. At sunset, Zeke recognized the sound of hoofbeats on the mountain road. Single horse, steady pace. Someone who knew the way. The man who emerged from the trees was tall and weathered. His dark skin bore the scars of hard living, but his eyes held intelligence and caution. He studied Zeke with careful assessment before approaching the main house. Sierra met him at the door. Their conversation was brief and hushed. The man's gaze swept the property, noting every detail. His horse bore the dust of long travel, emergency dust. Zeke watched from the cabin window as they moved supplies from the underground storage. Food and water, clean clothes, medical supplies, the kind of provisions needed for a long, dangerous journey. 3 more riders appeared as full darkness settled. A woman with 2 children. All of them moved with the careful silence of hunted animals. They dismounted near the barn, leading their horses into the shadows. The truth struck Zeke with the force of a mountain avalanche. The hidden supplies, the fortified buildings, the careful positioning of the homestead away from main roads. Sierra wasn't just a widow managing a ranch. She was running an underground railroad station. The family that had arrived bore the marks of desperate flight. Worn clothes, hollow eyes. The children clung to their mother with the fierce grip of those who'd learned that safety was temporary. That freedom was something to be stolen in the darkness. Sierra moved between the buildings with quiet efficiency. She provided hot food and warm blankets. Her hands were gentle as she tended to the younger child's blistered feet. The same hands that had cared for Lily Rose. Zeke remained in the cabin, holding his sleeping daughter. The weight of knowledge pressed against his chest. What Sierra was doing was illegal, dangerous, the kind of work that got people killed or worse. But he remembered the auction block, the feeling of being valued as property, the crushing weight of powerlessness. These people had lived that reality their entire lives, had risked everything to escape it. The family stayed 3 days. Zeke helped without being asked. He brought water from the well, split wood for the fires, kept watch while others slept. No words were exchanged about the work. None were needed. On the 3rd night, the man who'd arrived first returned. He brought fresh horses and supplies for the next leg of the journey. The family would travel by darkness, following routes marked by sympathetic souls and hidden safe houses. Zeke watched them disappear into the forest. The woman turned back once, her hand raised in silent gratitude. Then they were gone, swallowed by pine shadows and hope. Sierra found him standing by the cabin door. She carried a lamp that cast moving shadows across her face. Her pregnancy showed more clearly in the yellow light. The curve of life amid all this careful defiance. You could turn me in. The words hung between them in the cool air. A statement, a question, a test. Zeke looked at her face, reading the controlled fear beneath her calm exterior. I could. But he wouldn't. They both knew it. The auction block had taught him the value of human dignity, had shown him what it meant to be reduced to property. These people sought the same thing he'd found in Sierra's unexpected bid. A chance at something better. Sierra's shoulders relaxed fractionally. The tension didn't leave entirely. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but recognition passed between them. Understanding born of shared experience with injustice. Inside the cabin, Lily Rose stirred in her makeshift crib. Her fever had broken completely. The medicine had worked its quiet miracle. She would live and grow strong in this mountain sanctuary. Zeke settled into the chair beside her bed. Through the window, he could see lights moving in the main house. Sarah continuing her work, preparing for the next group of travelers. The next risk taken in service of others' freedom. The weight of secrets pressed against the cabin walls. This knowledge changed everything. Made him complicit in work that powerful men would kill to stop. But as he watched his daughter sleep peacefully, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Purpose. The underground storage held more than medical supplies. Food caches spoke of feeding many mouths. Maps marked with safe routes. And friendly houses, weapons cleaned and maintained. This wasn't casual charity. This was war conducted in whispers and shadows. Sarah had saved him from the auction block, had provided sanctuary for his daughter, had risked exposure by letting him witness her true work. The debt went deeper than money, deeper than servitude. It reached into the realm of shared conviction, of standing against forces that reduced human beings to property, of protecting the vulnerable even when protection carried a deadly price. Morning brought new challenges. A rider approached from the valley, official bearing, badge glinting in the sunlight. Deputy Marshal Collins rode with the purposeful gait of a man carrying legal papers. Sarah met him at the property line. Their conversation was brief but tense. Zeke couldn't hear the words, but body language spoke volumes. Questions asked, answers given with careful precision. Suspicion met with polite deflection. The deputy's eyes swept the buildings, looking for signs of recent activity, evidence of purposes beyond simple ranching. His horse sidled beneath him, sensing its rider's tension. Behind the deputy rode another familiar figure. Cornelius Blackwood sat his horse with the satisfied posture of a man collecting debts. His gold watch chain caught the morning light. His smile held the promise of long-delayed revenge. Collins presented papers, official documents bearing legal seals, Blackwood's complaints about fraudulent purchase, questions about the source of Sierra's gold, demands for proof of legitimate income. Sierra's responses were measured, calm. She produced her own papers from the house, documents establishing her identity and recent arrival, bills of sale for property and livestock, everything properly witnessed and filed. But Blackwood's accusations carried weight. The deputy's questions grew more pointed. Where had the gold come from? Why had she paid such an inflated price? What was her real interest in acquiring the services of a broken rancher and his infant daughter? The questioning stretched through the morning. Zeke remained in the cabin, watching through windows as his fate was decided by men who'd never stood on auction blocks, never felt the crushing weight of being valued as property. Collins finally departed with promises to investigate further. Blackwood lingered, his eyes cataloging every detail of the property, his mind already working on new strategies, new ways to reclaim what he considered his rightful prize. When they were gone, Sierra approached the cabin. Her face was pale but determined. The deputy's visit had shaken her. Not the questions themselves, but their timing. The implication that someone was watching, waiting for mistakes. We need to talk. She led him to the main house. The interior was spartanly furnished but comfortable. Maps covered one wall, marked with routes and safe houses. The tools of her dangerous trade displayed with quiet pride. Sierra poured coffee with hands that trembled. Slightly. The morning's tension had cost her. Stress carved lines around her eyes. The weight of responsibility pressed against her shoulders. They're watching now, because of you. The accusation hung unspoken. His presence had drawn attention. Made her work more dangerous. The Underground Railroad depended on anonymity, on staying invisible to hostile eyes. But as she spoke, her hand moved unconsciously to her belly. The gesture revealed a deeper truth. She wasn't just protecting runaway slaves. She was protecting an unborn child, creating a world where freedom meant more than the absence of chains. The coffee grew cold between them. Outside, wind moved through pine branches with the whisper of secrets, of truths too dangerous to speak aloud, of choices that would define them both. Sierra's coffee cup trembled against the wooden table. The morning's interrogation had carved deeper lines around her eyes. She stared at the maps on her wall, each marked route a lifeline for the desperate. There's more you need to know. She rose. With the careful movements of late pregnancy, her hand pressed against the small of her back. But something about the gesture felt wrong, rehearsed. The protective curve of her arm didn't match the natural weight distribution Zeke remembered from Sarah's pregnancy. The railroad money, it wasn't just theft. Sierra pulled a leather portfolio from beneath a loose floorboard. Documents spilled across the table, land deeds, payment receipts, names and amounts in careful columns. A ledger of systematic fraud. The railroad company had been collecting money from local farmers, payment for land rights and passage agreements. Thousands of dollars that should have gone to honest families trying to build lives on the frontier. Instead, the money disappeared into corporate coffers. Magnus Cole runs their enforcement. He's been stealing from settlers for 2 years. Zeke studied the papers, recognized some of the names. The Hendersons had lost their farm last winter. The Parkers had packed up and moved back east, claiming they couldn't make the payments work. All of them victims of a system designed to fail them. I take back what was stolen first. Use it to fund the railroad. The moral complexity settled over Zeke like mountain fog. Sierra was a thief, but she stole from thieves. Broke laws to serve justice. Fed the hungry with bread taken from those who'd starved the innocent. Outside, hoofbeats approached at a measured pace. Different from the deputy's hurried arrival. This rider moved with the confidence of someone who belonged. Someone expected. Josiah Freeman emerged from the tree line. His weathered face carried urgency beneath its calm surface. His horse was lathered with hard travel. Emergency summons, Cole's in town, asking questions. Sierra's face went pale. She gathered the documents with practiced efficiency, returning them to their hiding place. Her movements held the fluid grace of someone who'd rehearsed this moment many times. How long do we have? Freeman's eyes swept the property, calculating distances and escape routes. His mind worked with the precision of a military strategist. Survival depended on thinking 3 moves ahead. Hours, maybe less. He's got federal backing now. The weight of that. Revelation settled over the homestead. Federal involvement meant resources, authority, the power to search without warrants and arrest without evidence. Cole had escalated beyond local corruption. Sierra moved to the window, her hand resting against the glass. She watched the tree line with the intensity of a deer sensing wolves. Every shadow held potential threat. Every sound carried danger. We need to move the supplies. They worked through the afternoon with quiet desperation. Crates disappeared into deeper hiding places. Maps were rolled and sealed in oilcloth. The evidence of their work vanished into the mountain stone embrace. Zeke carried supplies without question. The moral arithmetic had simplified itself. These people fought for something larger than personal gain. Their risk served others. Freedom, that was enough. Lily Rose slept in her makeshift crib while her father became an active participant in revolution. She was too young to understand the stakes, old enough to benefit from the outcome. As evening approached, Sarah made another revelation. She led Zeke to a mirror in the main house and began removing pins from her hair. Her careful facade unraveled with each pulled strand. The pregnancy padding came next. Layer after layer of cloth and cotton fell away until she stood revealed. Not a widow carrying new life. A woman carrying deadly secrets beneath manufactured vulnerability. My brother was James Caldwell. The railroad killed him. The truth struck Zeke with the force of a mountain avalanche. James Caldwell had been a legend among Underground Railroad operators. His death had made headlines across 3 territories, and his sister had assumed his identity to continue the work. The pregnancy was protection, sympathy armor. People were less likely to suspect an expectant widow of running dangerous operations. The disguise had worked for months, until Zeke's auction had forced her into public view. Coal nose, or suspects. They stood in the lamplight, surrounded by the tools of their trade. Maps and medicine, food and freedom. The infrastructure of hope built one careful choice at a time. Sarah's real shape was smaller than the padding suggested, more vulnerable. But her eyes held steel that no disguise could mask. The core of determination that had carried her through loss and danger. Why? Save me. The question hung between them in the golden light. Sarah's answer came slowly, weighted with truth too heavy for quick delivery, because you know what it means to be property. Outside, night settled over the mountains with velvet darkness. Stars emerged one by one, distant witnesses to human struggle. The Underground Railroad had operated under their light for decades, would continue as long as freedom remained something to be earned rather than inherited. Zeke understood his place in this larger story now. Not just a rescued debtor, but a fellow traveler on a road toward justice. His experience on the auction block had prepared him for this moment, had given him the moral clarity to choose sides. Freeman appeared at the door with 3 new travelers, a family fleeing bondage in search of sanctuary. They moved with the careful silence of prey animals, every sense alert for predators. The mother carried a baby close to Lily Rose's age. The father bore scars that spoke of harsh treatment and harsher escapes. Their teenage son watched the shadows with eyes too old for his years. Sarah welcomed them with practiced efficiency. Food appeared from hidden stores. Clean clothes emerged from secret caches. The machinery of compassion operated with quiet precision. Zeke helped without being asked. He understood the rhythms now, the delicate balance between speed and safety. These people needed rest, but rest was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. As the family settled into temporary shelter, Sarah pulled Zeke aside. Her face carried the weight of difficult decisions, choices that would determine whether they all live to see another sunrise. Cole will come tomorrow. When he does, you need to choose. The ultimatum was gentle but absolute. Stand with her and risk everything, or step aside and watch evil triumph through inaction. Neutrality was a luxury the mountain wouldn't allow. Zeke looked through the window at Lily Rose, sleeping peacefully in her crib. His daughter deserved a world where auctions blocks existed only in history books, where human dignity was recognized as birthright rather than privilege. I already chose when you bid on me. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. Her fingers were cold but steady, the grip of someone who'd learned to find strength in partnership, to trust carefully but completely. The night passed in preparation. Weapons were cleaned and loaded. Escape routes were reviewed and rehearsed. The travelers were given supplies for the next leg of their journey. Everything possible was done to stack the odds toward survival. Dawn approached with the inexorable weight of Judgment Day. Cole would come with federal authority and violent intentions. The confrontation could no longer be avoided or delayed. Sierra stood at the window, watching light creep across the mountain peaks. Her real silhouette was smaller than the disguise. Suggested, but no less formidable. Determination radiated from her compact frame. Freeman checked his rifle with the methodical care of a professional soldier. His movements held no wasted motion, no nervous energy. Just the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced death before and learned its rhythms. The family of travelers prepared for immediate departure if fighting began. They would disappear into the forest at the first sign of violence. Their freedom was worth more than anyone's life, including their own. Zeke held Lily Rose as morning light filled the cabin. His daughter gurgled softly, reaching for dust motes dancing in the golden beams. She was too young to understand the stakes, old enough to inherit the consequences. Through the window, he watched Sierra move between buildings with purposeful grace. She checked security measures one final time, ensured that whatever happened, the work would continue. The railroad would roll on toward freedom. Cole's approach came with the rising sun. Multiple riders this time. Federal badges glinting in the morning light. The weight of law and corruption combined into overwhelming force. The final confrontation was at hand. Truth would emerge from shadow. Justice would be tested against power. And in that testing, the true measure of human dignity would be revealed. Sierra stepped onto the porch to meet her enemies. Her small frame stood defiant against the advancing storm. Behind her, the Underground Railroad held its breath and prepared for war. Magnus Cole rode at the head of 6 men, their federal badges, catching morning light like fallen stars. His horse moved with the steady gait of a predator closing distance to prey. Dust rose from their approach, settling on pine needles like ash from distant fires. Sierra stepped onto the porch without the pregnancy padding. Her real frame looked small against the advancing threat, but her spine held rigid with defiance. She'd chosen truth over disguise, conviction over safety. Cole dismounted with practiced efficiency. His boots hit the ground with the sound of authority. Federal backing had made him bold, careless. He approached the porch with the swagger of a man who believed law and justice were the same thing. Search warrant. The papers crackled in the mountain air. Official seals and signatures granting permission to tear apart everything Sierra had built. Coley's smile held the satisfaction of long-delayed victory. His men spread across the property with military precision. They'd done this before. Knew where to look for hidden compartments and secret passages. The Underground Railroad had patterns, predictable weaknesses. Zeke watched from the cabin window, holding Lily Rose against his chest. His daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her future was being decided by men with guns and legal documents. The contrast between her innocence and the surrounding danger cut through him like winter wind. The search began methodically. Cole's men pried open storage areas and probed walls for hollow spaces. They found the medical supplies first. Too much for a simple ranch. Too organized for casual preparation. Sierra's explanations were steady but thin. Medical supplies for livestock. Preparations for harsh winters. The kind of over-preparation that made sense for an isolated homestead. Reasonable doubt wrapped around dangerous truth. But Cole wasn't interested in reasonable doubt. He was hunting bigger game. The kind of evidence that would justify federal intervention and permanent closure of this station. They found the maps next. Detailed charts of routes through 3 territories. Safe houses marked with careful symbols. The infrastructure of rebellion laid bare under official scrutiny. Cole's satisfaction deepened with each revelation. Freeman emerged from the tree line at midday. His hands were empty, but his eyes held the calculation of a man assessing tactical situations. He'd been watching, waiting for the right moment to act. Cole's men surrounded him immediately. weapons drawn but not yet aimed. The tension ratcheted higher with each passing second. Freeman's calm demeanor only increased their suspicion. The interrogation began in the yard. Questions about Freeman's business on the property, his relationship with Sierra, his knowledge of illegal activities. Each answer was weighed for truth and tested against known facts. Freeman's responses revealed nothing. Years of dangerous work had taught him the value of silence, of saying exactly enough to avoid immediate arrest but never enough to implicate others. Cole grew frustrated with the careful dance of question and deflection. He needed concrete evidence, proof that would stand up in federal court. Suspicion and circumstance weren't enough to justify the resources he'd committed. The afternoon brought fresh complications. Blackwood arrived with local backing. Town council members and business leaders who'd been convinced that Sierra represented a threat to community stability. Their presence legitimized Cole's investigation. Sierra was arrested on charges of operating an illegal organization. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Maps and medical supplies, suspicious visitors, and carefully hidden resources. Enough to justify detention pending further investigation. Zeke watched from the cabin as they bound her hands with rope. She didn't resist, didn't protest the charges or demand explanations. Her dignity remained intact even as her freedom was stripped away. Before they loaded her into the wagon, Sierra's eyes found his through the cabin window. A moment of connection across the chaos. Her gaze moved to Lily Rose, sleeping peacefully in his arms. A silent reminder of what they were fighting to protect. The wagon rolled away with Sierra as its prisoner. Cole rode alongside, his mission half completed. The underground railroad station was closed. The operator was captured. But the deeper truth remained hidden. Freeman approached the cabin after the dust settled. His weathered face carried the weight of difficult news. Cole's investigation was broader than anyone had realized. Other stations were being targeted. The entire network was under assault. They took Josiah too. The words hit Zeke with the force of a physical blow. Freeman's capture meant torture. Interrogation designed to break spirits and extract information. The gentleman who'd helped so many others would face brutality for his compassion. Night fell over the abandoned homestead. The building stood empty, but for ghosts of recent purpose. Zeke remained in the cabin with Lily Rose, uncertain of his status. Was he free? A prisoner? A witness to be silenced? Cole returned alone as stars emerged overhead. His men had departed with their prisoners, leaving him to complete unfinished business. The sound of his boots on the porch carried menace in their measured rhythm. The door opened without invitation. Cole filled the frame with his presence, studying Zeke and the baby with calculating eyes. His hand rested on his weapon, but didn't draw it. Not yet. You have a choice to make. The ultimatum was delivered with quiet certainty. Cole had learned Zeke's history, knew about the auction, understood the desperate circumstances that had brought him to this mountain sanctuary. Testify against the woman, confirm her illegal activities, help build a case that would see her hanged for treason. In exchange, receive a full pardon and enough money to reclaim his ranch. The offer hung in the air between them. Salvation purchased with betrayal. Lily Rose's future secured by destroying the woman who'd saved them both. The moral mathematics were brutal in their clarity. Cole produced a leather folder containing official documents. Land deeds with Zeke's name already inscribed. Financial instruments restoring his stolen wealth. Everything needed to rebuild his broken life. All it would cost was his soul. Zeke looked at his sleeping daughter. She deserved security. Deserved a future free from poverty and desperation. Sierra's sacrifice could provide that future. Her destruction could become Lily Rose's salvation. But the auction block had taught him something about the true cost of survival. Some prices were too high to pay and still remain human. Some choices destroyed the very thing they were meant to protect. Cole waited with the patience of a man accustomed to watching conscience battle necessity. He'd made similar offers before, knew the weight of fear and hope in desperate situations. Few people chose principle over survival. The baby stirred in Zeke's arms. Her small fist curled around his finger with trusting strength. Sarah's eyes looked up at him from their daughter's face, a reminder of love that transcended immediate circumstances. "I need time to consider." Cole's smile was thin but satisfied. Hesitation was often the first step toward cooperation. Fear worked more slowly than anger, but more thoroughly. Given enough pressure, most people broke in predictable directions. Dawn would bring his answer. Cole departed with the confidence of a man who'd planted seeds of doubt in fertile ground. The folder remained on the table. Temptation made physical. Corruption given form. Zeke sat in the darkness, holding his daughter while wrestling with impossible choices. Through the window, moonlight painted the abandoned homestead in silver and shadow. The infrastructure of hope stood empty but not destroyed. In the distance, mountains rose against the star-filled sky, silent witnesses to human struggle. The Underground Railroad had carved paths through their stone embrace for decades. Would continue as long as freedom remained something to be fought for rather than inherited. But tonight, one man faced the ultimate test of character. The choice between personal salvation and collective justice. Between the woman who'd saved him and the daughter who needed saving. The weight of that decision pressed against his chest. Like mountain stone, heavy with consequence, sharp with moral complexity. And in the darkness, Zeke Thornfield prepared to discover what kind of man he truly was. Outside, wind moved through empty buildings with the whisper of departed spirits. The ghosts of freed slaves and broken chains. The echo of choices made in desperate times by people who decided that some things were worth more than life itself. Dawn would bring his answer. And in that answer, the true measure of his character would be revealed. Dawn broke gray and cold over the empty homestead. Zeke hadn't slept. Cole's documents lay spread across the table, their official seals catching the weak morning light. Freedom and betrayal reduced to ink and paper. Lily Rose stirred in her makeshift crib, small fists reaching toward shadows that danced on the cabin walls. Her innocent movements cut through Zeke's heart. She deserved better than this choice between conscience and survival. Cole's boots announced his return before the knock came. The federal agent entered without invitation, his eyes immediately finding the untouched documents. His smile held grim satisfaction. "Have you decided?" Zeke lifted his daughter from her crib. Her warmth against his chest steadied his resolve. Some prices were too high to pay, and still look yourself in the mirror. Some choices destroyed the very thing they promised to protect. "I won't testify against her." Cole's expression didn't change, but his hand moved closer to his weapon. He'd expected this outcome, prepared for it. Men who'd stood on auction blocks rarely cooperated with their oppressors, regardless of incentives offered. Then you're complicit in her crimes. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Zeke understood the implications. Refusing to cooperate made him an enemy of federal law, a target for the same treatment Sarah would receive. Cole gathered his documents with practiced efficiency. The offer was withdrawn. The consequences were now unavoidable. Zeke had chosen principle over pragmatism, honor over survival. "You'll both hang for treason." The threat was delivered without emotion. Simple fact stated by a man who'd watched many necks stretch for the crime of compassion. Cole departed with the certainty of someone who held all the advantages. Alone again, Zeke searched the cabin for anything Sarah might have left behind. Some message or instruction for this exact situation. The Underground Railroad survived through careful planning and hidden contingencies. Behind a loose board near the window, his fingers found folded papers. Not maps or supply lists, but something more precious. Evidence of the railroad companies. Systematic theft. Names and amounts stolen from honest families. The documents detailed years of fraud. Farmers cheated out of land payments. Settlers robbed of passage fees. Thousands of dollars diverted from rightful owners into corporate accounts. A pattern of corruption that reached from local banks to federal offices. Sira had been gathering proof of the railroad's crimes while using their stolen money to fund freedom. Justice serving justice in an endless circle of moral complexity. The woman was more than a thief. She was an accountant of systemic evil. Zeke studied the careful columns of figures, recognized names from his former community. The Hendersons had lost their farm when railroad payments never arrived. The Parkers had been driven east by debts that shouldn't have existed. Every family in Copper Creek had been touched by this corruption. Every neighbor who'd watched him stand on that auction block was also a victim of the same system. They just didn't know it yet. The truth was weapon enough to destroy Cole's investigation. Proof that the railroad company was the real criminal organization. Evidence that would shift blame from the Underground Railroad to the corporate thieves who'd stolen from honest settlers. But getting that truth to the right people required reaching town. Required standing before the same community that had watched him sold. Required trusting neighbors who'd bid on his labor to now listen to his testimony. Lily Rose fussed in his arms, sensing his tension. Her small cry echoed through the empty cabin. A reminder that some choices couldn't wait for perfect timing or guaranteed outcomes. Sometimes moral courage meant acting despite overwhelming odds. Zeke packed supplies with careful efficiency. Food and water for the journey. Clean clothes for court appearances. The stolen documents wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from weather. Everything needed to wage war with truth instead of weapons. The walk to town took most of the morning. Mountain paths gave way to valley roads. Pine forests yielded to farmland. With each step, the weight of coming confrontation grew heavier on his shoulders. Copper Creek looked smaller than he remembered. The buildings seemed shabby in daylight. The town square where he'd been auctioned appeared diminished. Shame had magnified everything in his memory. Word of his return spread quickly through the small community. People emerged from shops and homes to stare at the man who'd been sold and disappeared. Their faces showed curiosity mixed with suspicion. He was a ghost returning from presumed death. The sheriff's office occupied a corner building near the courthouse. Sheriff Martinez had been fair but weak during Zeke's troubles. More interested in avoiding conflict than ensuring justice. The kind of man who followed orders rather than conscience. Zeke entered with Lily Rose cradled against his chest and the documents tucked inside his coat. Martinez looked up from his desk with surprise and concern. Harboring fugitives was federal business now, above his authority and beyond his comfort. I have evidence of railroad fraud. The words transformed the small office. Martinez straightened in his chair. The documents spread across his desk revealed a scope of corruption that dwarfed local concerns. This was territory-wide theft affecting hundreds of families. Each page told a story of systematic deception. Money collected but never delivered. Families driven from their land by artificial debt. A corporate conspiracy that had operated in plain sight for years. Martinez studied the evidence with growing amazement. His own brother had been cheated by railroad payment delays. Half the county had suffered similar losses. The scope of the crime was staggering in its audacity. Where did you get these? Sira Caldwell. She's been gathering proof while using their stolen money to help escaped slaves. The moral mathematics were complex but compelling. Sira had robbed robbers to fund freedom. Had stolen from systematic thieves to serve systematic justice. The Underground Railroad was revealed as symptom rather than cause. Martinez understood the implications. Cole's investigation was targeting the wrong criminals. The real conspiracy involved corporate executives and federal officials. The Underground Railroad was fighting the same enemy as defrauded settlers. But acting on this evidence meant challenging federal authority, questioning Cole's investigation, standing against powerful interests that reached beyond territorial boundaries. Martinez had never shown that kind of courage. Through the office window, townspeople gathered in the square. Word was spreading about Zeke's return and the documents he'd brought. The same neighbors who'd watched him auctioned were learning they'd also been victimized. Mrs. Henderson approached the sheriff's office with purposeful strides. Her husband's farm had been lost to railroad debt. Now she learned that debt had been artificial, created by theft rather than legitimate obligation. Others followed. The Parkers had returned from their eastern exile. The Morrison family brought their own railroad correspondence. Piece by piece, the pattern of systematic fraud emerged from community experience. The crowd outside grew larger, angrier. These were hard-working people who'd been cheated by institutions they'd trusted. Their losses weren't accidents or market forces. They were deliberate theft disguised as legitimate business. Martinez faced a choice between federal pressure and community justice, between following orders and serving the people who'd elected him. The documents on his desk provided legal justification for either path. Cole appeared at the edge of the crowd with his remaining men. His federal authority was supposed to override local concerns. But federal authority looked smaller when faced with an entire community demanding answers. The confrontation was inevitable. Cole represented the system that had protected railroad corruption. Martinez held evidence of that corruption. The townspeople were victims seeking justice. And in the middle stood Zeke Thornfield, holding his daughter while the truth he'd carried down from the mountain began reshaping everything around them. The auction block had taught him about powerlessness. The mountain had shown him the value of moral courage. Now the town square would reveal whether truth was stronger than institutional corruption. The crowd pressed closer to the sheriff's office. Their voices rose in demand for explanations. Cole's hand moved toward his weapon, but 6 men couldn't intimidate an entire community. Numbers had shifted the balance of power. Martinez stood at his window, watching federal authority confront local anger. The documents in his hands could either quell the crowd or ignite revolution. His choice would determine whether justice served power or power served justice. Sheriff Martinez stepped onto the courthouse steps with the railroad documents clutched in his weathered hands. The crowd fell silent, their faces turned upward in desperate hope. Lily Rose gurgled softly in Zeke's arms, the only innocent sound in the charged air. These papers prove systematic theft. The railroad company has been stealing from every family here. A collective intake of breath swept through the gathered townspeople. Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her throat. The Parkers gripped each other's arms. Years of mysterious hardship suddenly made terrible sense. Cole pushed through the crowd with his remaining men, federal badges glinting in the afternoon sun. His face had gone pale beneath its weathered surface. The investigation he'd built was crumbling like wind-carved stone. Those documents were obtained illegally. They can't be used as evidence. But Martinez had found his courage at last. The sheriff who'd been too weak to prevent Zeke's auction now stood firm against federal pressure. Sometimes justice arrived late, but arrived nonetheless. These people have a right to know they've been robbed. The crowd pressed closer to the courthouse steps. Voices rose in anger and recognition. Individual stories of loss wove together into a tapestry of systematic oppression. The railroad hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen dreams. Cole's hand moved toward his weapon, but 6 men couldn't silence an entire community. The balance of power had shifted with the revelation of truth. Federal authority meant nothing when built on corruption. From the back of the crowd, a new voice called out, Federal Marshal William Hayes emerged with a small contingent of real federal agents, not railroad enforcement, not corporate thugs in federal clothing, actual law enforcement. We've been investigating railroad fraud for 6 months. These documents confirm everything. Cole's face went ashen. His corrupt partnership with the railroad company was exposed. The federal backing he'd claimed was revealed as corporate protection. His authority evaporated in the mountain air. The real federal agents moved with practiced efficiency. Cole and his men were disarmed and detained. The investigation he'd corrupted was transferred to legitimate hands. Justice would be served by actual lawmen. Marshal Hayes examined the documents with professional interest. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, enough to bring down not just local corruption, but the entire corporate conspiracy. Where is Sierra? Caldwell now. Cole's illegal detention was revealed. Sierra and Freeman were being held without proper authority. Their rescue became a federal priority. The Underground Railroad operators were transformed from criminals to key witnesses. The ride to Cole's holding facility took 2 hours through winding mountain passes. Zeke remained with Lily Rose while the federal agents reclaimed their prisoners. Justice moved slowly but inexorably toward its proper conclusion. When they returned, Sierra looked smaller than Zeke remembered. The ordeal had carved new lines around her eyes. But her spine remained straight, her dignity intact. She carried herself with the quiet pride of someone whose conscience was clear. Freeman bore the marks of interrogation, but moved under his own power. His weathered face showed relief mixed with wariness. Freedom was fragile for men who dedicated their lives to serving others' liberation. The reunion was subdued but profound. Sierra's eyes found Zeke's across the courthouse steps. Recognition passed between them. Gratitude for choices made despite overwhelming pressure. Respect for courage shown when courage was costly. Lily Rose reached toward Sierra with tiny hands. The baby remembered the woman who'd provided medicine and gentle care. Innocence recognized goodness regardless of legal complications. The federal investigation moved swiftly once proper authority was established. The railroad company's books were seized. Corporate executives were arrested. The scope of the fraud expanded beyond territorial boundaries. Restitution was ordered for all affected families. The Hendersons reclaimed their farm. The Parkers received compensation for their losses. Every family cheated by railroad corruption would be made whole. Blackwood's role in the conspiracy was exposed during the investigation. His banking practices had facilitated the fraud, enabled the theft. His authority in Copper Creek crumbled with his credibility. The auction of Zeke's labor was declared illegal. The debt that had forced his sale was revealed as artificial, created by the same railroad corruption that had victimized his neighbors. His ranch was restored without condition. But restoration meant more than returning property. The community that had watched his humiliation now worked to rebuild what they'd allowed to be destroyed. Neighbors who bid on his labor now offered their hands freely. The barn raising took place on a clear autumn morning. The same hands that had valued him as property now built his future without payment. Redemption worked both directions in small communities. Sierra worked alongside the other women, preparing food for the workers. Her false pregnancy was forgotten. Her Underground Railroad activities were quietly celebrated. Heroes were sometimes criminals in the eyes of unjust laws. The railroad investigation led to congressional hearings and corporate prosecutions. The Underground Railroad was acknowledged as a symptom of larger injustices. Freedom couldn't be illegal when slavery was the alternative. Winter approached with promises of peace. The homestead in the mountains became a legitimate way station for legitimate travelers. The work continued, but with community support rather than community secrecy. Zeke's ranch prospered with returned fertility. The drought had broken along with the conspiracy that had impoverished the region. Good rains brought good harvests. Justice and agriculture flourished together. On quiet evenings, he and Sierra would sit on the porch while Lily Rose played in the yard. Their relationship had deepened through shared trials. Trust forged in crisis proved stronger than conventional courtship. The baby took her first steps on the anniversary of the auction. Her tiny feet carried her between the two people who'd shaped her world. From father to chosen family, from past to future. Sierra had become more than savior or employer. She was partner in the truest sense. Someone who'd stood beside him when standing was dangerous. Who'd risked everything for principle rather than profit. The mountains held their secrets quietly. The underground railroad paths were less traveled now, but not abandoned. Freedom remained a journey rather than destination. The work would continue as long as injustice existed. Copper Creek prospered in the aftermath of truth. The community that had been divided by desperation was united by shared purpose. Common enemies had created common ground. Judge Harrison arrived for the final legal proceedings. Sierra's pardon was formalized. Freeman's record was cleared. The Underground Railroad operators were recognized as heroes rather than criminals. The courthouse steps where Zeke had been auctioned became the site of celebration. Justice had come full circle. The place of his humiliation was transformed into the scene of his vindication. As spring returned to the valley, new life emerged from winter's grip. Sarah's garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers. Lily Rose grew strong and curious. The future stretched ahead with promise. The auction block was dismantled quietly one morning. The wood was used to build a school. Education would prevent future generations from accepting such injustices. Knowledge was the foundation of lasting freedom. Years later, when Lily Rose was old enough to understand, they would tell her the story. How broken people found strength in each other. How justice sometimes wore the mask of criminality. How family was built through choice rather than blood. The mountain homestead remained a symbol of sanctuary. A place where the desperate could find shelter. Where the Underground Railroad's legacy lived on in acts of daily compassion. And in the valley below, Zeke worked his reclaimed land with hands that had held his daughter through the darkest times. The same hands that had trembled on the auction block now planted seeds in fertile soil. The harvest would feed both body and spirit for generations to come. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.